Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone is doing good this morning. This video is an introduction to what I'm calling transmutational astrology. It's an extension of evolutionary astrology. I had considered calling it transcendental astrology. However, there's already some transcendental astrologies that exist, and um, it doesn't quite capture the essence as well as transmutational astrology. So, what is transmutational astrology? Let's start with evolutionary astrology as a basic and then branch out to see how transmutational astrology is different than that. So, evolutionary astrology is the idea that the birth chart um, is your karmic patterns, right? It's the idea that the birth chart is a snapshot of all of your karma from past lives, and so karma in this sense is habit energy, and so it's your samsaras, right? It's the samsaric tendencies that you have, and that's what your birth chart represents, right? And as we know from yoga and many other disciplines, there are lots of ways to change your samsaras, and so evolutionary astrology views the chart as a path for you to grow, right? It uses the energies that are present for your growth. And then it has sort of a higher and lower expression of each type of energy that's present. Transmutational astrology is going to take evolutionary astrology a step further. And in essence, transmutational astrology is going to be changing your birth chart. That is the absolute essence of transmutational astrology. So if you've ever seen a part of your birth chart that you didn't like, if you wanted it to be different, um, then transmutational astrology is going to work with you to change your birth chart into the chart that you want, right? And this sounds insane. It sounds egoistic. It sounds nuts. It sounds like, how can you change your birth chart, right? It sounds like something that wouldn't be possible. But I'm going to give you a lot of examples of how it is possible. And we're also going to talk a little bit about in this video about sort of the philosophical foundational underpinnings of transmutational astrology, right? So sort of the basic foundation of why I believe it's possible to completely change your birth chart. Um, we live in a time, where um, we are literally making electrons out of light, right? We're smashing lasers together and creating matter, right? We're creating matter from light. That's the time that we live in. We're living in a time where if you don't like your gender, you can completely change it, right? You can completely transform your gender. And it's going to get to the point where, they're going to be genetically altering you and you won't even have Y chromosomes. You'll just have the X chromosomes if that's what you want, right? So we're getting into this time where we can change um, anything. We're not completely there yet, um, but we're moving to that. We're moving to a transmutational world where what we can imagine, we can create. Um, this is powerful, right? This is powerful, and this is what we're moving to with astrology too. There's a lot of different systems out there, and currently in the astrological community, uh, it's kind of a splintering. It's kind of going in a lot of different directions, right? I was watching a video with Stephen Forrest the other day and Chris Brenner, and they're like, "Where is this going to go?" Um, there's so many things coming online. Like there's so many different types, but that's actually where it's going to continue to go. We're living in a more and more rainbow universe because we're not taking things as fixed anymore. Um, we take nothing as fixed, and so astrology, in my opinion, is going to be moving into a transmutational astrology where any part of your chart that you don't like, any part of you that you don't like, can be changed and will be changed. And so, yeah, that's the basis of it. And some of the underpinnings of that, there's both the sort of metaphysical underpinning, and then there's a physical basis for this. And I want before we go too much into that, I want to caution you that this type of astrology is not going to be able to bypass things, right? And that was one of the issues that I had with the word transcendental astrology, is that oftentimes people approach transcendental stuff in a sort of spiritual bypass type way, but that's not the case with this. You can't bypass with transmutation astrology. The way to change is through, right? If you want to turn lead into gold, which is the art of alchemy, the art of transmutation. If you want to take the lead that you have and turn it into gold, you have to go through that entire alchemical process. Um, you can't skip steps, right? At least not currently. Maybe in the future, who knows? But but right now you can't skip steps. So the transmutational process is going to be about developing a strong relationship with the energies and archetypes that are present in each of the planets, and then learning how to change that energy and use it in different areas of your life, right? Different houses, right? If you want different house placements, you'd be like, well, this is where all of my focus is currently. Well, you can, over time and with enough energy and will, and shift that to a different house placement. So, um, that is going to be transmutational astrology. And so here's some of the philosophical underpinnings of transmutational astrology. Um, as above, so below, as within, so without, right? We often question, how does astrology work, right? How does this work? Is this a function of consciousness? Are there physical mechanisms at play? And I actually believe it's a little bit of both. I believe there are physical mechanisms, and I also believe it's primarily a function of consciousness, how it works, right? And so, if it is a function of consciousness, then as we dive deeper into our own consciousness, then we can change it, right? We can change how those energies work within us, right? Um, it's entirely possible to completely transcend your astrology through a deep understanding of the planetary energies. Okay? And it's entirely possible to transmute any part of your chart, to transmute your Mars energy, to transmute your Pluto energy, which is transmutational energy, right? And we'll get into what it means to transmute transmutational energy. Really interesting there, right? And so this is going a step past evolution, right? We have evolution now as a concept, and so what's next? How do we do that? So let me just give you some examples, and actually let me just talk about some of the physical. Uh, Percy Seymour, I believe is his name. There's Seymour Percy. I get his name backwards. Wrote a really interesting couple of books actually, where he had a lot about the possible scientific mechanisms behind astrology. One of them was about like electromagnetic stuff and how the placements of the planets influence the sun electromagnetically, which then influences the electromagnetic field of the earth, which then influences the actual electromagnetic field of our bodies, right? So there is an electromagnetic component that is occurring on a regular basis, right? He was an astronomer and an astrophysicist. Now we also know that human beings, through different meditative practices and different thoughts, all of this, like the vibrations, this multi-dimensional vibration of being that we are, this electromagnetic being, right? Even the matter that we're made of is actually energy, just at a different frequency, right? And in some sense, it's even light, just in a different form. And so as we understand ourselves better, right? Our thought patterns, our emotions, the way we feel in our physical body, we can actually change our resonance. We can change our electromagnetic field, right? Like the Heart Math Institute, for example, when they do their heart-centered meditation, it changes the magnetic field and creates a cohesion amongst the people who are present, right? You know, monks that have had like EEGs and things attached to their brains, they change the electrical wavelength of their brain patterns, right? They're changing them consciously, right? So if we have the ability to change our waveform, right? We're waves and particles, but if we have the ability to change our waveforms consciously with effort and intention, and if that's one of the mechanisms by which astrology works, then in principle, we can change our astrology, right? If the input is a particular, right, like let's say we're talking about a transit, and let's say it's a Venus transit or a Mars transit. Let's say it's a Mars transit, and the input that you're getting is a strong Mars energy, right? There's different ways that people can use Mars energy. We see it all around us, right? We see so many different ways. And so if you have an awareness of the different ways in which you can move Mars energy through your body to change it, right? You can move it inside. You can take that angry, or that doesn't have to be angry, but that passionate, fiery energy, and you can use it for inner work. You can use it for outer work, right? There's so many ways that you can use it. You can move it up into your mind, right? And then get a very active mind, right? Someone who has, like, say, Mars conjunct Mercury, very, very active mind. A lot of fire and energy there, right? And if, in principle, another being uh, has Mars conjunct Mercury and has a very active mind, then in principle, that's something that you can learn to do as well, right? I mean, we can change endlessly, right? Endlessly, we can change. And if you know how that energy feels in your body and in your mind and in your soul, if you know how it feels and you can consciously choose to use it in a different way, right? Let's say you have Mars in the fifth house and you like to create and play and have a lot of fun, right? You can take that energy and you can say, you know what, actually, I want to move this to the sixth house and be of service and express my passion in that way, right? We can actually change what we're passionate about, right? What we're passionate about doesn't have to be fixed. And it will change throughout your life. You've probably noticed this, right? When you were 3, you were probably passionate about dinosaurs or unicorns, right? And that's what you loved, right? Uh, when you were 10, maybe you were passionate about baseball, right? And if Mars is passion, right? There's a lot of passion in Mars. Then you can choose what you want to be passionate about, right? Well, we often think that mastery follows passion, but sometimes passion actually follows mastery. Sometimes when you work at something a lot, then you become passionate about that thing, right? It's not always the other way around. And we know this, right? We know this from like behavioral economics. We know this from behavioral psychology. And in principle, if someone else has a chart, right, you can always grow to be more like someone else. If this chart is your samsaric imprint, right, the more self-awareness that you develop, you can completely change all of your samsaras, right? All of them. Every single one can completely be changed. It just takes effort and will and energy, right? And awareness, right? And so developing that awareness. Now we look at something like aspects. I have Sun square Pluto, and of course, here I am teaching a transmutational astrology course. It's quite fitting with that Sun square Pluto. But Sun square Pluto, my Sun and my Pluto have almost merged. At one point, they were like this, they were square, but now my Sun and my Pluto energy, I identify more as a process. I don't even identify as some sort of like fixed entity, right? And so Pluto is sort of the evolutionary process, and that's what my identity has become. Um, and in some sense, that's not even correct either, because all of that is always changing, right? So questions of identity come into astrology a lot, right? Self-identity. And identity is like, it's not who we are. If you see the root, we're consciousness, right? And this is what yoga has been teaching forever, is that we're consciousness. Um, that's what we are. We're consciousness expressed in form. And so as you get a deeper connection to that universal consciousness, then who knows what becomes possible, right? All the limitations start to break down, and we're seeing that in the world, right? Well, the Pluto energy is just the very beginning of that, really. By splitting the atom, right, uh, to either make an atomic bomb or a nuclear reaction to create energy. We're seeing that's just the very beginning, right? That's nothing compared to where we're going, right? We're creating matter out of light. Matter from light. So, yeah, so that's the very basics of transmutational astrology. And with that sort of basic outline in mind, the way that we're going to move forward with all of this is talking about the archetypal energy of astrology. Now, you can use what's already in your chart to help you move forward and change, right? Because again, this is not a bypassing. You can't bypass something, right? Like if if you want to start a car, all of the pieces have to be working, and then you can change the pieces and make different pieces, and there's all kinds of different ways to create locomotion. But if your car, right, if your vehicle has like a particular setup already, like maybe go with that setup for now, and then as you understand how that setup works, then it starts to be able to be more adaptable. And so the way this course is going to be set up is that we're going to go through every single planet and really understand their energies, and we're going to go through every single aspect, and then we're going to understand from each planet how to shift that energy, right? If you know how Mars energy works with Sun energy, how Mars energy works with Mercury energy, how Mars energy works with Venus energy, we can take any energy that comes to us from the stars, right? Like let's say you have a Pluto transit or a Neptune transit. We can take that energy and move it into any kind of way that we want to move it, really. Like we really can. We can transmute the Neptune energy into another kind of energy because it's just energy and it's just consciousness, and these are archetypes. And so if you understand the relationship between all these energies and the relationship between all of these archetypes, if you deeply understand those relationships, then you can move them differently, right? Um, and that's the whole point, right? And so anyone who comes to me, the way that I work with them is that if there's a part of their chart that's giving them trouble that they don't like, right? And that's typically why a person comes to an astrologer is they're having trouble. Uh, they almost never do if they don't, if they aren't. But typically, that's what they come for is some problem that they're facing. Um, we look at the chart and there's a game plan that can be set up for how to change any part of this chart, right? If you want to change something about yourself, there's a game plan to do it, right? Like let's say you want to change your gender. Let's say you're male and you want to change your gender. You got to take estrogen and T blockers, and then you do a bunch of other stuff like that, and that's like the steps, right? Like then you do voice training, and there's all these different things that a person can do to change their gender, right? The same is true of your chart, right? And we have to acknowledge where we're at, right? Because you might see, or hear stories of like a yogi who can just transform into a deer and then like be wild in the wild. And I can't do that, right? And so I have to know what my limitations are currently, and maybe in a million lifetimes I might be able to do that. I don't know. But I do know the degree of change that I have gone through in this life, and the relationship that I have to my astrology has changed completely, and many of my clients, the relationship to their astrology has changed too. So we're going to go through each planet one by one, and we're also going to talk about aspects and the nature of aspects and how to, if you understand how that energy works, then you can move it and change it differently. And so I had also considered calling this a tantric astrology because it contains the essence of tantra, which is that allowing of energy to move and shift by working with what is. When we work with what is, then you can change it into something else. And so it's a little bit of a step beyond evolutionary astrology. It contains evolutionary astrology, and then those components can help you evolve and grow. Uh, but ultimately, the idea is that like you will be able to design your birth chart how you want, right? And that's the idea. Uh, Not an easy process. I won't claim that it's easy, but that's the process. Okay, that's it for transmutational astrology today. That's the little intro. Stay posted because there will be coming a lot of videos on all of the planets. We're going to start with the sun and move from there. We're going to move through all the planets in the solar system, and we're going to move through all of the aspects, and we're going to take a transmutational approach to every single one, right? And this is going to be the course. So, many blessings to all of you, and let us continue our journey.